Welcome into the show today. Thank you for making this podcast part of your day. Even though I'm feeling crummy, as you can hear in my beautiful sounding voice like an angel coming out of the sky, we're still delivering. And on this episode, I'm going to share why the Minnesota Vikings need to revolve their off-season priority around quarterback JJ McCarthy. But first, I want to talk about this. A big discussion happened following the Kansas City Chiefs Buffalo Bills game. Because on 4th and 1, the Buffalo Bills did a tush push. And what's so funny is that everyone wants the tush push banned because it's an unfair play, when it's really not. The Buffalo Bills got stopped by the Kansas City Chiefs several times in that game. The Minnesota Vikings have tried it before. They've got stopped. The only team that I see have a high success rate with the tush push is the Philadelphia Eagles. But regardless, they do the tush push. You got the official on the top of the screen marking it as a first down. The official on the bottom of the screen marking it down as a 4th down stop from the Kansas City Chiefs. And technology has come into play. And I saw a lot of discussions about what tennis does to enhance their ability to call play in or out. Players have the ability to review a play. The fans clap, and it looks something like this. The ball is a virtual reality graphic of the ball hitting the line or not hitting the line. And I see a lot of, the NFL should do something like that. And I don't think people realize the challenge in the NFL doing something like that. One, the ball doesn't necessarily or hardly ever hits the ground. The tennis ball hits the ground. So you know where it is in or out or whatever. The football, when you got a guy holding the ball and you've got 5, 6, 7 guys piling on a single football player with the ball, how is this technology supposed to help? And I heard about the chip in the football, and I don't think we are understanding just how complicated it is to put a chip in the football and get that ball where it needs to be. Because how would the football know, or how would the chip inside the football know when the play is over, or the ball is actually spotted? And maybe they'll come out with something in the next 5 years, or maybe they won't. Because what also isn't good is having a tush push happen, and you've got guys from 30 yards away. I don't know how far it is from the 50-yard line to the sideline, but 20, 30 yards away from the ball, trying to distinguish where the ball is. So as much as people want to criticize officiating and the referees in the NFL has done them no favors. With 5 guys piled on Josh Allen, you go decide where that football should be marked when you can't see a darn thing. How are you supposed to know where that ball is marked? It's a guessing game every time. Every time. Because forward progress comes into play. So if I was an NFL official, I would feel backstabbed by the NFL for not providing something to help me with a first down call. And if I was the NFL, I would return and say, you know what? What are we supposed to do? There's 5 guys piled on Josh Allen. Who's saying that the chip will tell us where the ball should be marked? There's a lot of complications in this whole ordeal, and I don't think it's as simple as what tennis does, because there's no guys piled up on a tennis ball, and they can easily do virtual reality, and you can't do that in the NFL. So let's not pretend that this is a simple black and white issue. Just do this and it will solve the problem, because the NFL would have. So let's transition to topic. And the big topic today is that the Minnesota Vikings should revolve their off-season priorities around JJ McCarthy. And here's why. It would appear that Sam Darnold will not be back on the Minnesota Vikings. That's the vibe from the Minnesota Vikings organization. And with that means JJ McCarthy hopefully steps into a QB1 role. And with that being the case, the Minnesota Vikings need to figure out their left guard and right guard spots. Christian Darrisaw will be back. Brian O'Neill was solid. Garrett Bradbury could be improved. Certainly could use an upgrade at that position. But protecting the interior offensive line, getting better protection on the interior offensive line needs to be numero uno priority of the Minnesota Vikings offseason. Because when I think about JJ McCarthy, he is not a guy that can take big hits in the NFL, because he's not the biggest guy in stature. He's tall enough, but he's not thick. When you think about Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, these guys are thick, big boys playing quarterback. Lamar Jackson's not thick. He's not big. Jaden Daniels isn't big. But those guys have the quickness to escape heavy pressure from the pocket or outside the pocket. And JJ McCarthy, he can move, but he can't move like Daniels or Jackson. So figuring out the interior offensive line needs to be the biggest priority of the offseason for the Minnesota Vikings. Because what we need is for JJ McCarthy to have time and to be protected in the pocket so he can find his guys out wide. And the last thing that you want from a guy who's starting his first game in the NFL is pressure all in his face. You don't want him seeing ghosts like Sam Darnold saw with the Jets and like Sam Darnold saw in the final two games of the Minnesota Vikings season. So with the salary cap space the Minnesota Vikings have available, it needs to be their biggest priority to bring in a left guard and a right guard to solidify the interior offensive line. And Garrett Bradbury can last another year. He's a veteran presence, and I think the Minnesota Vikings would be encouraged by that for first-year starter JJ McCarthy. And the last thing the Minnesota Vikings want, and the last thing that Kevin O'Connell wants, is McCarthy going down with an injury because Blake Brandel, Dalton Reisner, or Ed Ingram could not protect him in the pocket. And right now, the Minnesota Vikings investment is in JJ McCarthy. If he succeeds, the Minnesota Vikings could win playoff games. And if he fails, Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah will be on the hot seat immediately. Because that's how it works. The NFL revolves around the quarterback. And the Minnesota Vikings are now in a position to have their team revolve around first-year starter JJ McCarthy. And in order for him to perform at his highest level, and in order for the Minnesota Vikings to win games next season with a first-year starter, with a guy that has no experience playing in the NFL yet, they need to protect him in the pocket and give him confidence and time to throw. So that has to be offseason priority number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. And then you can address other areas of need. Because offensively, besides the offensive line and figuring out the running back position next season, the Minnesota Vikings are in good shape. They need to figure out the offensive line, they need to figure out the running back position, and they need to figure out their secondary. But besides those holes, the Minnesota Vikings don't have all that much to address. Wide receiver, they're good. Tight end, they're good. Quarterback, they're good. Defensive line, they're good. Linebacker, they're good. Secondary needs to be fixed. Running back needs to be solved. And the offensive line needs to be upgraded. And that is the Minnesota Vikings plan this offseason. So, thank you for watching this episode and for making this podcast a part of your day. Hit that subscribe button wherever you are watching or listening. And thank you for making this podcast a part of your day and for going on this podcast journey with me. I think I'm feeling better already. Have a great day, everyone.